All right, give me just a minute for people to get in. I see Eli's in on Facebook. So Eli's going to take care of managing Facebook, I guess. Tim is there. It's from Ohio. So, Tim, it's actually good to see you. I haven't seen you since right before I left America. So, hopefully, you're still doing all right and still in touch with Brandon. But, all right. Just giving a little bit for people to come in. As you come in, I didn't say a lot about it in the comments because I was rushing to get things done. I had a lot to do. Obviously, anybody who's been around from Sunday knows I was very sick on Sunday. And then recovering from that, I haven't been in my office a lot this week. I've worked out of the house most of this week, so I have not spent a lot of time doing things in the office I would normally do, and I'm quite behind at this point. So I'll give greetings to you as you come in because this study is a little more personal and more interactive. That's why I do it in my office, so I can sit here and see you directly as you comment and so forth. So for Barry, it's good to see you. I really haven't talked to you in a long time. I've missed you, but hope you're doing well. For Brother Kendrick, I'm glad to see you pop in again. I know you're normally working around this time, so you don't get to stick around for the whole study, but it's really good to see you. I hope you and the church are doing well. I do see you doing live streaming though, so I do appreciate that. I am feeling better. And also, if you're on YouTube, I see that we've got Nick there, so we have a moderator for YouTube. So anybody popping in on YouTube, you have a moderator there to help if I'm in the middle of something and don't get a chance to greet you when you come in. For everybody coming in on Facebook. Like I say, so far I've greeted you as best I can when you come in, but I would be glad to actually talk if you want to type and say something to me. I'm at the point now I've not started the study yet, so you have an opportunity to communicate with me before I get going. Once I get going, I'm not as quick to answer something that gets posted unless it just gets my attention. And then the other side of that is in the end, I will allow time for questions. So if you've not been a part of this study before, this is your first time getting involved with this particular type of study, I would like to point that out again, that there will be a time for questions there at the end of it. So what I recommend and what I always recommend when you go to any kind of Bible study is bring something with you to write. And that way you can write down your thoughts and your questions and ideas and all that kind of stuff you have. To be honest with you, I recommend anytime you sit down at the Word of God, you do that. That was advice, I believe, first heard that from Adrian Rogers. Adrian Rogers said that anytime you sit down at the Word of God, you should do so with expectation. And so doing that with expectation, part of that means that you should be expecting to hear something from him. And part of that means that you sit down with pen and paper in hand. That way, whatever he tells you, you can write it down and you have it. He also was a very vocal advocate of the principle that ink is stronger than the sharpest mind. Because I have a bad habit of trusting on the fact that I have a really good memory to the point that I irritate people sometimes because I can remember stuff. Brother Branch can attest to that from the other night, that he was trying to remember how we first met, that it wasn't, it was some funny things that happened there. And he couldn't recall it quite, but I had every detail still in memory from years ago. And I'm not saying to be arrogant, it's just that's why sometimes I make the mistake that instead of putting stuff on paper like I ought to, I trust my memory, and then some very important things do slip from time to time. Okay, we're getting ready to start here in just a moment. I see we've got a few more people in on YouTube, so especially if it's some of our people from the church, I would really appreciate it if you leave some kind of comment. Let me know that you're there, that you're watching, because this is the interactive Bible study. So, what that means is that I am actually going to try to interact with you. I will take questions at the end of this. I will try to greet you as you come in, that kind of stuff. So, as you come in, please make sure you leave some kind of comment. Let us know that you are watching. All right, it was good to have you here with us, Brother Kendrick. I know that you're working right now, so I really appreciate you just stopping in at least to get us started. But for anybody else, as you're coming in, please do leave some kind of comment and let us know that you're actually watching. You didn't just accidentally click the video, but that you're somebody who's here and part of the Bible study. Also, again, it helps in terms of knowing who I'm teaching to. And it also helps with the interactive side of this. Also, if you're on YouTube and you don't leave any kind of comments, Nick is going to feel very left out because Eli is getting all the fun over on Facebook. So somebody has to leave some comments on YouTube, even if Eli just goes over there and pretends to be somebody. All right, let's go ahead and get started then. We're in Habakkuk chapter number 2. I said from the beginning that as we do this study, it's not so much to do a deep understanding of everything in the book of Habakkuk. Obviously, when we do that kind of study, I mean, we spent months trying to get through just the book of Jude because we were doing it 1 and 2 verses at a time. It took a long time to get through the book of Jude when we do a deep study. So this particular study was never intended to do that. It was that I had prayed about something I could get through in a few weeks while we're here in quarantine. Is just something that I felt would be relevant, something that I felt in terms of timing and the ability to get through it, that it was something we were capable of. And I stand by that. That's why we've chose Habakkuk. We prayed about it. And so, in praying about it, the Lord laid that on our heart that this is very much a very timely book. It is, I understand the relevance that it is very much a companion to the book of Jeremiah and all the other books that deal with the Babylonian captivity. So, obviously, you should read it with some understanding of those books as well. However, one thing that doesn't get brought out about it is the fact that this book is very much a companion with the book of Job, in that it is a study of understanding the nature of how God works. It is God. You when you read the book of Job, you have these people debating. And in the case of the book of Job, the debate is primarily between him and his 3 friends, and then eventually Elihu. That they're debating about the nature of God and why Job is suffering. And in this particular case, it's actually a conversation between God and Habakkuk as to why God is going to let Israel suffer underneath the Babylonians. Now, we've already seen, because we took 2 weeks to do chapter 1, because some of your best, most outstanding verses are in chapter 1. We took 2 weeks to do that. But in chapter 1, we saw very plainly what's going on here, and that's that Israel has been very unfaithful to God. They have, for a long, long time, took advantage of the grace of God, and now God is choosing to let the Babylonians come onto the scene to use them as the rod of his chastisement, to correct them. We especially brought that out last week as we looked at God's sovereignty, how God is very much in control of all of these things. None of this is catching him by surprise. Now, this week's lesson goes in a similar direction. We are going to do a little bit more of a verse by verse study this time. But again, we're not trying to glean out every little detail of information. We're not trying to get every little gold nugget. We're just trying to hit across the high points because we're looking more at the topics of Habakkuk. So I already give the title, of course. You have that when you click on the message. That the title of this week in Habakkuk, our third study, is that we're looking at God's solution in suffering. What is God doing? And so I think this chapter really brings that out. And in this case, we'll begin by reading verse 1 through 4, since we're going to try to do the whole chapter today. He says, I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and will watch to see what he will say unto me, and what I shall answer when I am reproved. And the Lord answered me and said, Write the vision and make it plain upon tables, that he may run that readeth it. For the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak for and lie not and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. Behold, his soul, which is lifted up, uh, is not upright in him, but the just shall live by his faith. Now, this particular passage tells you the whole point of what matters about this message to you and I. Now, God's going to discuss His plan. He's going to talk about His solution, what He's doing, and He's going to, God's actually very kind with Habakkuk more than other people in similar situations. I mean, for example, when Daniel asked to understand the prophecy, God says it's not for you to understand. You can't get it all. When Job asked to understand, and we'll talk more about this maybe later in the message, when Job asked to understand, why he's went through all of this, God essentially tells him, Job, I have made everything in this universe, and you don't even begin to understand it. You're not going to understand me. Um, and so, actually, Habakkuk, God is really generous with the amount of information he gives Habakkuk, and the way he speaks with him is very kind. And so, that's why when people talk about Habakkuk being whiny or any of that kind of stuff, I don't believe that at all that was the intention of the way he's writing. Even look at the way he speaks when he says, I will stand upon my watch and set upon the tower and will watch to see what he will say unto me and what I shall answer when I am reproved. He says, all right, I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to watch and see what God has to say to me and what I need to respond when he corrects me. And he's waiting. He's waiting to be reproved. And when you look at that, the fact that God's very generous with the information, God's very open in the way that he speaks to him, and his own openness, and that he's willing to be corrected. He's waiting to be reproved, and then he'll see what he needs to say. I really believe that, as opposed to how a lot of people depict Habakkuk, Habakkuk was not at all bad in his intentions. He was not at all somebody who was just whiny. He was someone who had misunderstood. We saw very clear that was the main theme of chapter 1, is in terms of the issues on Habakkuk's side, was he just didn't understand. He didn't understand how a holy God could allow someone like the Babylonians to come in and conquer Israel. He didn't understand how that a sovereign God could sit by and let this happen. But at the same time, you see him correcting his own self and saying that I know this is not for our destruction, but that God is using this to chasten us. So Habakkuk was actually a man of considerable understanding, and this is a man who reasonably and sincerely is wanting to speak with God and understand the situation. And I believe that's part of why God is talking to him about it, that he's giving him an abundance of information. Now, with that in mind, what you'll notice, though, is in verse 4, especially, is why I say, even though he's going to give us the information, he's going to explain to us what he's doing, he already tells you that that's not the important part. The important part is the just shall live by his faith. And you'll notice that every time he gets to an end of a thought, he calls back to that in some sense, I believe. That the most important thing, and you'll see this, I think, as we go through the chapter for you and I, is to realize that we don't have to know God's plan. We just have to know that he has one. We don't have to know when we're suffering, when we're going through hard times, when we don't know what's going on and we don't know what tomorrow holds. You don't have to know all of that. You have to know who holds tomorrow. You don't have to have the plan. You don't have to understand it all. You just have to trust him. And that's why, as a husband, as a father, I face that frustration all the time, that I wish sometimes my family would learn that they don't have to know everything about what's going on. They can trust me, trust that I have a plan, that, the reason why we're getting in the car is because I plan to go somewhere. You don't need to know where it is. You just need to trust me that we're going there. As a pastor, I face that same frustration with my church as well. Sometimes I need people to just trust me. You don't have to ask a million questions. Just come along and you will see. Very soon you will see. And that's essentially what God is telling to Habakkuk. He said, you write it down. I'm going to give you the vision, and it may look to you like it's not coming into play. It may look to you like it's waiting, like it's taking too long. But don't worry. Even if it takes longer than you think, it's not going to stop forever. It is coming. It is going to happen. And so, again, there's a very beautiful lesson here that you and I need to understand, that the focus of what's going on in this chapter is not so much that God's going to give him the information and explain what he's doing, but that you and I have to learn to trust God regardless of whether we have that. It's a matter of learning to trust God that His ways truly are higher than our ways, regardless of whether we know or understand. It's a matter of learning to live by faith and trust that God really does know what's going on. You may be taken by all of this. You may be completely shaken. When you lose a loved one, for example, you're completely shaken and taken back by it. God already knew it. He already anticipated it. He already had arrangements for it. This virus and all that's going on right now with the quarantines, a lot of people are worried and upset, and there's two main camps of which side, and that's why you'll hear me mention many times in my speaking whichever side of that you're on, because I'm not going to argue with you to take sides on it. But what you find in this is that none of it, and this is the most important lesson, none of it has taken God by surprise. Now, so again, we're going to see that he gives the lesson. He gives okay, this is what I'm going to do to Habakkuk, and explains why the Babylonian captivity is going to take place, what he's doing through all of it, what he's going to do to the Babylonians, and what he's going to do to Israel in all of this. But before he ever touches any of that, he brings out the single most important thing in this chapter is that you need to learn to live by faith and trust God. That you may not know what the plan is, but he does. You may not understand where this is going and how this can work together for good. We say we believe that all things work together for good for those that love God, those are the called according to his purpose. And the single most important thought of this is that you have to believe that whether you understand how that's happening or not. You have to trust him whether you understand him or not. Now, I know it's the most frustrating thing in the whole world when when somebody wants to know how could this happen or why did this happen. It's, well, God works in mysterious ways. It's the most frustrating answer in the world, and the truth is, it's probably not something you should ever actually say to somebody. Um, but there is a certain degree of truth in it. And that certain degree of truth is that God's ways are higher than ours. And when we don't understand and when we don't see when his path is hidden to us, that's exactly what faith is. It's walking where you cannot see. Faith is trusting what you cannot see, believing what you cannot see. Could you see it and could you understand it all? You wouldn't need faith. If you understood everything God was trying to do in your life, you wouldn't need faith because you would have your understanding to lean upon. Could you see every step God had for you to take? You wouldn't need faith because you would be able to see that. So the fact that faith is required and the just shall live by his faith is a simple point that you and I have to learn at some point, that it's not God's responsibility, nor is he even capable of helping you to understand everything he's going to do. If you could understand in our finite brains everything that God is trying to do in his infinite wisdom, I don't think that his plan would be a God level plan. It would have to be a human level plan. God's ways are truly higher than ours. Now, you can understand some things, and that's why he's going to explain some to Habakkuk, but you'll never understand it all. And where your understanding ends, where your sight ends, where your strength ends, and all of that ends, you have to learn to step by faith. That's the single most important thing for you to take away. I'll be honest with you. If you cut me off right now and didn't listen to anything else I have to say, you've got the most important part. But if you want to know and understand a little more and see a little bit about how God works during our times of suffering and all of that, stick with me because that's what we're going to look at. We're going to get to see a little bit of the insight and nature of what God is thinking and what he's doing, how he's letting the pieces fall in place and move everything as he's going through something like this. So then picking up in verse 5, it says, Yea, also because he transgresseth by wine, he is a proud man, neither keepeth at home, who enlargeth his desire as hail, and is as death, and cannot be satisfied, but gathereth unto him all nations, and heapeth unto him all people. Shall not all these take up a parable against him, and a taunting proverb against him, and say, Woe to him that increaseth that which is not his? How long? And to him that ladeth himself with thick clay. Now, what he's talking about is, of course, Nebuchadnezzar. We understand that that's the Babylonian conqueror who's getting ready to come in. He's such a huge character in the book of Daniel. You obviously, if you have any Bible knowledge, you know who he is, you know about him. You know some of his stories. You know that God is going to humble him at one point, make him like an animal. You know about him building the giant statue, demanding everybody to worship it. You know his experiences with Daniel and with Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego. You know all of that stuff. So you understand this person. In fact, we have a great insight into what kind of man Nebuchadnezzar was because we have the book of Daniel. We know he's the kind of man who wanted to be worshipped. He wanted to be seen like a god. That's why he builds the image, the statue in his image, to have people to bow down and to worship the way that he does. He's a very proud man. And so God's even saying the same things about him. He says he's a man who is given to wine. He's a man who allows it to cause him to bring him into sin. He is a very proud man. He's one who's not willing to just be happy and content at his place, but he's the kind of man who's going to push out and take nations and conquer. He is going to gather together with no discretion, like death and hell. He's just going to take and take and take, and he's never going to be satisfied. He has no respect of anything to where one thing is valued above the other. He's just going to come in and take and conquer and destroy. That's the way he is describing Nebuchadnezzar. Now, what's interesting about this, though, is he explains to you why he's letting Nebuchadnezzar do this. And there's two parts to this plan. One concerns Nebuchadnezzar, and that's the first part we'll look at. The other is about Israel. Now, the reason why I believe he starts with Nebuchadnezzar is because we've already seen in chapter 1 Israel's side of this. But Habakkuk asked a valid question. And that's why I believe God answers it, because it is a valid question. That question is, how could God allow someone as evil as the Babylonians to judge someone like Israel? That Israel was bad. They had their problems, but they were not nearly as bad as the Babylonians. So why let the Babylonians be the rod of his chastisement? And there's where he begins to pick up and deal with is that idea. And so the idea is he brings out here that he's going to let the nations turn against them. He says, I'm going to let Nebuchadnezzar go forward, and I'm going to let him be that guy that can't stay at home and is never satisfied and takes without any discretion and just crushes anything in his path. I'm going to let him do that. And while he's doing that, while he's trying to build his name like he's a god and make everyone to bow down to him, at the same time he's doing that, people are not going to learn to love him the way he wants or to fear him even the way he wants, but instead he'll be turning people against himself. That with everything he's doing, people are going to look at him and say, what is this man that he would come in and conquer and destroy so many others with no discretion and no respect of anything else? And he even continues that. He shows you that even beyond when we look to verses 7 and 8 as well. It says, shall they not rise up suddenly that shall bite thee, and awake that shall vex thee, and thou shalt be for booties unto them, because thou hast spoiled many nations. All all the remnant of the people shall spoil thee, because of the men's blood, and for the violence of the land and of the city and of all that dwell therein. Something this shows us about how God works, and something that's really incredible when you stop and think about this, is God says, I'm not stopping the Babylonians because we understand Israel needs chastisement. Somebody's got to do it. And he said, I'm not going to stop the Babylonians because I'm not worried about the Babylonians. The Babylonians will come and go. The Babylonians are going to come through like a fire. They're going to steamroll through everything. They're going to build their kingdom, and just shortly after, it's going to crumble. You're going to have Nebuchadnezzar come. You're going to have one to come after him, and then the Persians are going to come in and take it away, and it's nothing. Their kingdom is just a vapor that appeareth for a season and vanisheth away. Why would it be worth God's time to worry about them? That what he's going to let them do to Israel needs. They deserve it. They're a child who needs a spanking. They need these years in captivity, and God's ordained these years in captivity because of the way that they have treated him. And you notice the number of those years, as we've talked about before, is specifically picked because of the number of Sabbath years that they skipped and didn't give God the honor that he rightly deserved. And he'll call them out later in this chapter on some specific sins that he wants to deal with concerning Israel. The most potent or the most important one that he deals with being idolatry. Uh, but his point being is that when it comes to why Nebuchadnezzar is essentially why not Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's ready. He's built up his kingdom. He's ready to go out. He's the kind of man who's going to go and do these things. And in terms of why don't I stop him? Well, because I've ordained him for chastening you. And when he's done, he'll get his chastisement. He'll get exactly what he deserves. His nation will be crumbled into dust, and everybody will come pick at it like vultures. So it's amazing when you understand the way God sees things and looks at it, is that a lot of times he doesn't get involved in the way we would expect him to. Now he sees, he understands, he picks and chooses a lot of these kind of things in terms of what he allows and what he calls us. We've discussed a lot concerning that side of God's nature that he calls us or allows. Um, but when it comes to nations, especially wicked nations, there's a lot that he lets go because he realizes that men and their kingdoms are but temporary. They come and they go, and we'll see the most important point of that. In fact, let me not waste time because the most important point of that comes up in verse 14. So in verse 9, and just to correct Eli, that is G, not EJ. So greetings to G. Also greetings to everybody else who's come in. I see some friends from school and all kinds of stuff, people dropping in today. So if you're still watching, I give you my greetings. Like I said, I would appreciate comments from people who actually stick around and watch a little bit. But verse 9 is where we have to pick up. It says, woe to him that coveteth an evil and covetous to his house, that he may set his nest on high, that he may be delivered from the power of evil. Thou hast consulted shame to thy house by cutting off many people, and sinned against thy soul. For the stone shall cry out of the wall, and the beam out of the timber shall answer it. Woe to him that buildeth a town with blood, and establisheth a city by iniquity. Behold, it is not of the Lord of hosts. Is it not of the Lord of hosts that the people shall labor in the fire, and the very fire the people shall weary themselves for very vanity? What he's discussing here is this. He's warning and explaining at the same time that when you see something like this, where a man like Nebuchadnezzar will spend a lifetime building up this massive empire. And I mean, Nebuchadnezzar built a massive empire. In fact, in the terms of empires in the Bible that are addressed in prophecy, God regards the Babylonian Empire as being the higher of them. He gives more respect of it than he does of the Greeks or the Romans or the Medo-Persian or even the kingdom of the Antichrist. But by calling it the head of gold, while as each of the next, diminishes in its value. So Nebuchadnezzar did something incredible, sure. But when you look at it, God says that you do all of these things and eventually it ends. In fact, even look at it that way, verse 1 is verse 9 is a warning. And then verse 13 is, behold, he's explaining it's all vanity. That you do all of this, God's already told you. He's already said it. That if you waste your life trying to build your name, build your empire, build your whatever, that it's vanity because it will be destroyed. It will crumble. It will fall down at some point. And as much as I would love to have other passages and stuff to write that are written down that I like to talk about, but I want to allow some time at the end for questions. Let me see if I can give very quickly Ecclesiastes 2, because even Solomon, uh, I mean, you very much, I think, underestimate what Solomon did and how powerful and incredible his kingdom was when he was the king of Israel. Ecclesiastes 2 and verse 1 says, I said in mine heart, go to now. I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, and behold, this also is vanity. So what he says, I told my heart, go ahead and get at it. It's a term you only see it two other times there in the book of James, when he's talking about men running after their own plans or putting trust in riches, but trying to do things their way and not God's. So he's talking about trying to do something his way and not God's. And he said, I'll just try joy and see if pleasure and enjoying this life is enough to bring fulfillment and happiness without God. And he says it's vanity. That was a waste of my time. And then verse 2, he said, I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? So he said, laughter is just crazy, and what does joy? What does it do? It's nice, but what does it actually do to make life of value? Uh, he said, I sought in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquainting mine heart with wisdom, and to lay uh, hold on folly, till I might see what was that good for the sons of men, which they should do under heaven all the days of their life. So he said, I also tried wine, I tried wisdom, and in all of this, I'm just trying to figure out what is the right thing for somebody to invest their life in apart from God. What could we do that's not a vanity? Now, the reason I'm bringing this passage in the respect of what we just read in Habakkuk is because he's warning Nebuchadnezzar that all his work and his labor is going to fall in on itself, and that it's all vanity. That his kingdom, he'll build it, and it'll be great for a time, and then it'll crumble in on itself, and it will be worthless. It'll be nothing, and it will not. It'll be forgotten eventually. Um, so it's especially that statement of it being a vanity that connects these passages, but there's more going on because Solomon is actually asking the question here. He said, I've tried joy, I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. What then is the answer? What is it if we're going to live life without the pursuit of God being our central focal point? What then should be our central focal point? What could bring fulfillment and lasting joy? What could bring purpose and meaning to life? What could bring real and true value to a life? Uh, and so he said in verse 4, I made me great works. I builded me houses. I planted me vineyards. I made me gardens and orchards, and I planted trees in them of all kinds of fruit. I made of the pools of water. I made me pools of water to water therewith the wood that bringeth forth trees. I got me servants and maidens, and my servants born in mine house. Also, I had great possessions and great and small cattle above all that were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered me also silver and gold and peculiar treasures of kings and of the provinces. I gat me men singers and women singers, and the delights of the sons of men as musical instruments and all that of all sorts. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remaineth with me, and whatsoever mine eyes desired, I kept not from them. I withheld not mine heart from any joy, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and that was my portion of all my labor. Then I looked on all my works that my hand had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all was vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. See, Solomon brings out a point here that's relevant to what God is telling Nebuchadnezzar, and it's something each of us need to learn to understand at some point. And that is that apart from God, if God is not the center of your life and your goals, and we know with Nebuchadnezzar it was not, that Nebuchadnezzar, we even talked about it in chapter 1, had the mentality that I did this. That I'm the one who made nations to bow down in front of me. He gave no regard to the fact that God is the one who steamrolled a path for him, that he allowed him to do this. And so Solomon is saying that I tried it all. I mean, I tried everything you can think. I withheld nothing from my heart. He was the wisest and wealthiest man who ever lived. I mean, he was so wealthy that just one example of his wealth is that it says in the Bible at the time of him being king, silver was in such an abundance that silver was worthless. It was like a rock on the ground. You couldn't even sell it. It was trash to them. That was how much silver was in abundance at the time of him being a king. It was like a rock on the ground. It was like gravel. Um, but even beyond that, I mean, his kingdom that he built it's breathtaking. It's incredible. I mean, the Queen of the South and others came from great distance just to see him, because it was mythological almost, this idea of what Solomon was and what he had done. I mean, you think about it, in his time, he brought peace to the Middle East, something nobody else has done, nor will they do till Christ comes. Or, well, I guess you can say to a degree, the Antichrist will make a false peace. But until Christ comes and sets up his kingdom, there'll not be true peace there again. But I mean, what he did was incredible. And he said, it's really sad when you get to that verse. He said, I stopped and I realized it's vanity and vexation of spirit. It's vanity. It was worthless. It breaks my heart to look at it and realize, because he explains in another passage that he realized after having built his kingdom that he'll have to pass it on to somebody else. And whoever he passes it on to, they'll destroy it. And if they don't destroy it, their children will destroy it. But it'll be crumbled into dust and it will be nothing. It'll be forgotten. It only takes a little time for that to happen. And in Solomon's case, he was prophetic. It was in the next generation. His son did it. His son split it in half. Uh, and so the point being there is God's warning Nebuchadnezzar the same thing that Solomon's writing the whole book of Ecclesiastes to warn, something that God warns repeatedly throughout the Bible is that you can build your kingdoms, you can do all of this stuff, and God will let you get by with a whole lot, but you're wasting your life when you could be seeking the true God. You could actually be doing something of value with it. And so part of what he's teaching then in this point is why he's letting Nebuchadnezzar get by with so much and letting him do what he's doing is because the same way that he loves you and wants you to come to know him, he loves Nebuchadnezzar too. And he gave Nebuchadnezzar a chance to turn. He gave him a great space. You think about it, Nebuchadnezzar had Daniel for a preacher. I mean, Nebuchadnezzar had someone, one of the greatest men in the Bible, as his preacher, and he still, it's debated very heavily and very highly whether he ever got saved. He got to the door of it. I mean, at the time that God delivered him from thinking that he was an animal and walking around for several years on his hands and knees, eating from the grass. When God delivered him from that, when you read his declaration, about that the God of Daniel is the one true God, it would have you to think that, okay, I would like to think that man got saved, that he really meant that and believed that. But he also could just been somebody who was taught to reverence and fear, but never truly accept and believe. So I will leave you to debate whether Nebuchadnezzar got saved. It's a whole other issue, but there's a point being made here then about Nebuchadnezzar as to why. Why let Nebuchadnezzar, who was such an evil person compared to even the worst kings of Israel? I mean, there were some kings that might have been worse than Nebuchadnezzar, but in general, Israel was better than anything Nebuchadnezzar had to offer. Why him? Why let him be the one to chasten them? And God's saying, well, as much as I want to chasten you, I'm also trying to reach out to Nebuchadnezzar. As much as I want to chasten you, I love him. And I want him to come to know me. So I give him a time to realize that what he's living for and what he's doing is a waste of his life, that he could be doing something so much greater if he would just learn to turn his eyes upon Jesus, to learn to look and seek the one true and living God. I believe that that's what he's trying to explain to Habakkuk, is that he's giving that space of repentance to him. We see that. I mean, he's telling him that one thing is I'm not going to stop him because I'm not worried about him. I'm not worried that Nebuchadnezzar is going to get so big that I have to intervene because I already know what's going to happen. That his kingdom's going to be taken over by the Medo-Persians. I'm not worried about that. The other side of that is I'm more concerned with him. But then verse 14 is one of the other more important verses in this chapter. I don't think a lot of people read into it to understand what it actually means, though. He says in verse 14, "For the earth shall be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, as the waters cover the sea." Now, a lot of people read that, they think, oh, it's beautiful. Everybody's going to know who God is. So he wants Nebuchadnezzar to know who God is. And that would be fine if you read it that way. That's fine. But there's another issue. When I did our study on end time prophecy, especially the kingdom of Christ, we did that on Wednesday nights for a while. One thing I would noticed is this phrase popping up a lot. It pops up a lot. The one that stands out the most to me to prove the point I'm trying to bring out would be Isaiah 11:9, where he says the exact same thing. That the earth will be full with the knowledge of the Lord as a water covering over the earth, just like what he's explaining here. But when you read it, it's part of the prophecy where he's also talking about the boy leading the lion, and the wolf and the lamb being able to lay down together, and the child being able to play with the snake and not getting bit, which we all understand is part of his kingdom. That's part of the kingdom of Christ, explaining the safety of how he'll be fully in control of this world. Now, with that in mind, then, if this is a phrase that is, as I'm saying multiple times repeatedly, used to point to the kingdom of Christ and Christ ruling here on earth, is there's two sides to that coin. Then that yes, he is talking about this idea that he wants everyone in the world to know who he is, so he gives Nebuchadnezzar a chance. But the other side of this is he's not worried about putting an end to Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. He's not worried about fighting with Nebuchadnezzar to put a stop to him, because Christ is coming at some point and he'll put an end to all kingdoms. So until then, there's a lot of stuff that God's going to let go. There's a lot of things that you're going to scratch your head and say, God, why? And it's because it's not the time. There is a time where he is going to deal with it. There's a time where every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess, but it's not today. There is a time where every evil thing will be crushed under his feet, but it's not today. There is a time where everything that leaves you scratching your head and saying, why or how, how could God let this happen? Why did God let this happen? All of those things will be dealt with, but it's not today. Today, God lets a lot of things go on, in part because he sees the bigger picture to realize it's not as big as you think it is. And in another part, because there is someone that he cares about that he's giving a space of repentance to, or something else that he's trying to let work out. And so that's why I say, when concerning the idea of God's solution and all of this, it does give you a tremendous understanding in how God chooses what he allows and what he causes. And how God chooses where to intervene or where not to intervene, and these kind of things. Now, with that said, like I said, I wanted to try to rush through some of that. I didn't get through it as fast as I wanted, because I still want to deal with the last part of this chapter. Give me just a moment to drink something. But I want to try to finish the chapter in verse 15. It says, "Woe unto him that giveth his neighbor drink, that puttest thy bottle to him, that makest him drunken, also that thou mayest look on their nakedness. Thou art filled with shame for glory. Drink thou also, that thy foreskin may be uncovered. The cup of the Lord's right hand shall be turned unto thee, and shameful spewing shall be on thy glory." Me coughing is not coronavirus. I repeat again, not coronavirus. I have tonsillitis. Doctors have confirmed that, so don't get worried. It's the first time I've spoke this long since I've got it. But what he's discussing here is almost in reality the same thing Jesus talks about in Matthew 7, when he is making the statement to not focus on the splinter in your brother's eye. Okay. I'm going to ask that people do not message me on Facebook Messenger right now, because it just messed up my computer when somebody chose to do that. So I'm going to ask that people don't message me on Facebook Messenger, please, because I'm doing a live study and it messes up my computer when you message me on Facebook Messenger. All right. So then, looking at what he's trying to say here in this particular message, he's essentially bringing out that same idea that why are you worried why are you using your brother's nakedness? Now, it's a little more convicting, because he's actually chastening someone who would get someone drunk in order to see them naked. And he says, if it's something like that, it's not a big deal, it's not a problem, then why don't you get drunk and let people see you naked? But I believe the purpose of what he's trying to bring out in this is more to deal with this idea of this idea that you and I shouldn't be focused on the neighbor so much in trying to bring out his sin, as we should look to better understand where we are and what we are, that we could better appreciate just what God is trying to do in our lives. especially in the light of all of this. That again, before this, the focus was don't worry about Nebuchadnezzar. We're talking about you. That Nebuchadnezzar is just the rod I'm using to chasing you. Then he explains, okay, if you really want to know about Nebuchadnezzar, this is it. But now I think he's turning the attention back to them and saying, look, don't worry about him. Why are you worried about your brother's nakedness? Worried about your own. Worry about your own sins. I think that's really the heart of what he's trying to get at here by bringing that point across. Then verse 18 and 19, it says, what profiteth the graven image that the maker thereof hath graven it, the molten image, and the teacher of lies, that the maker of his work trusteth therein to make dumb idols? Woe unto him that saith to the wood, awake, to the dumb, arise, it shall teach. Behold, it is laid over with gold and silver, and there's no breath at all in the midst of it. All right. So looking at this passage, then, what he's bringing out with us is that the real issue at the heart of all of this, the main reason why all of this is going to come to pass, the main thing that God is trying to do and everything, is he's trying to deal with the idolatry in Israel. That Israel had become a fully idolatrous country. We know that. If you read the stories throughout Kings, you understand everything that's going on that led into the Babylonian captivity. It's the same story and over again. You'll get a king like Hezekiah, or you get a king like Josiah. You'll get one of those few good kings. They'll clear out the idols, and then Israel will fill back up with the idols. It's an issue of up and down over and over again. They don't change. The idolatry is in their heart. And he wants them to see the foolishness of their idolatry. That if they want to trust in idols, let the idols deliver them. That God is going to, if he's the one putting them there. So if the idols are stronger than him, let the idols stop him. Because God has said that I'm going to put you there. And there's a certain beauty in understanding some of the argument of this. That in Jeremiah, he brings out the issue that the false prophets are all saying that there's peace, there's comfort, it's okay, that God's not upset, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, that your sins are all okay, God doesn't care, it's all right. And God says it's a lie. There is no comfort, there's no peace. It's God does care very much, and God is going to punish. It's Jeremiah 6 is the place you'll find a lot of that. And so the idea ties back into that particular chapter where God is making the point that he does care very much about all of this, and he is going to deal with it. And if they're idols, if they're false prophets, if they're the ones who are right and they're all honest, let them stop God. Let them be strong enough to stop him. That way they might see the foolishness of the idols. They have pushed God far enough, and it's time now that they need to be spanked. They're children who are too rebellious and too stubborn. And so if they think they're stronger than the father, then it's the father's time to spank them. And if they're strong enough to stop him, okay, then so do it. And then finally we come to verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Now, this particular verse actually calls out to a lot of verses in the Bible, more than you would think. The one that stands out the most I will jump to is in Isaiah 41, verses 1 through 4. I would also bring out Psalm 11, verses 4 and 5. Psalm 11, 4 and 5 helps you to probably understand the point of what he's saying when he says, but the Lord is in his holy temple, let all the earth keep silence before him. Because some will talk about this as being to worship God and so forth. And sure, there's some thoughts there. But if you look at Psalm 11, let me go ahead and read it for you. This is very clearly speaking about us realizing he's in control. He's the one making the judgment. Let us just be quiet. Psalm 11, verse 4 says, the Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes behold, his eyelids try the children of men. The Lord trieth the righteous, but the wicked and him that loveth violence, his soul hateth. So there's a point here that God is sitting in his throne. God is completely in control. He sees what's going on. He already has judged and decided that what is evil is wrong and it will be condemned. and he is trying the righteous. That means each and every one of us, his people, that he loves us, but he also is willing to chasten us, and he's watching from heaven and he's doing his job. Then Isaiah 41, I would give because it's very important. Isaiah 41, uh, you could debate as to who it's about. Most people would say it's about Cyrus. I would say that would be correct. I would probably need to do a little more study into it to really take a huge stance, but I would say it's probably very correct that Isaiah 41 is about Cyrus. But it's the reason I say it's important is because this is God speaking his opinion about Cyrus the same way that we've already seen him talk about Nebuchadnezzar. So we understand Nebuchadnezzar comes first, and then Cyrus is the one who will come along with the Persians to conquer in the very same way that Nebuchadnezzar did. So, discussing Cyrus coming along a little bit later to do the same thing that Nebuchadnezzar did, this is what he has to say. Isaiah 41 and verse 1. Keep silence before me, O islands, and let the people renew their strength. Let them come near, then let them speak. Let us come near together to judgment. Who raised up the righteous man from the east, called him to his foot, gave the nations before him, and made him rule over kings. He gave them as the dust of the sword, and as driven stubble to his bow. He pursued them and passed safely, even by the way that they had gone with his feet. Who hath wrought and done it, calling the generations from the beginning. I, the Lord, the first, and with the last, I am He. Now, what he's saying here concerning this idea is he's asking the question: Who let Cyrus loose? Who let him do this? And now he actually calls Cyrus righteous because Cyrus will do a lot of much better things. But he says, "Who let him loose and let him to come through and conquer in this way that he's going to come through and conquer?" And he said, "I did it." And he even says, "I did it with the ones before, and I'll do it with the ones that come later." That when somebody comes through like a wildfire like this, God allowed that. He either allowed it or he caused it, but he said, "I'm the one who let him loose." And so when you understand that what he's saying in both of these passages is that I'm completely in control. I made this decision because there's some things I'm trying to deal with. In the case of Israel, with Nebuchadnezzar, I'm trying to clear out some idolatry. I'm trying to clean up some things. In the case of Cyrus, it's actually to clean up Babylon. Cyrus is coming through to put an end to them and actually restore parts of Israel. To give the order to let Nehemiah come back in and build and so forth, those kind of things. Nebuchadnezzar was used to chasten. Cyrus is going to be used to restore. And so when you look at that and understand it, it's actually quite a blessing, to really take and see how that God uses things that you and I don't understand, but He's completely in control. So sometimes we just need to step back and be quiet. We just need to stop asking so many questions, stop being so concerned, and realize God actually He's got this. He is in control. He does know what He's doing, and He does have a solution. He does have a plan. Sometimes He's trying to work in somebody's life the way He's trying to work in the life of Nebuchadnezzar. That He's giving him a chance. He's giving preachers like Daniel to him, and He's giving him a chance to hear and turn. Sometimes He's using a man like Cyrus to come through and get rid of the wickedness of the Babylonian Empire and restore some things in Israel, to help them to go back and rebuild the temple, rebuild the walls, get Jerusalem back on its feet. And so that's what he's trying to help explain through all of this. Is that for you and I, we don't always understand how that, okay, this is rolling into the next thing. This is God using all things to work together for good. You see that in this situation. Everything was Him allowing things to play out in a way that worked together for good to accomplish the purposes He wanted done. You and I just have to live by faith and trust Him for that. You can't see it, you can't understand it all the time, but you do have to trust Him. That's the chief lesson of Habakkuk chapter 2. All right. So I apologize. I got slowed down quite a bit, especially when I started coughing. Again, I have tonsillitis, and it's the first time I've talked for almost an hour without any real pauses. So my voice is not hanging with me. I will take some questions. So if somebody's got a question, don't leave me hanging. I see we have a brother from Pakistan joining in, so I appreciate that. Uh, and then for anybody else who's still hung through the lesson, made it this far, you can go ahead and leave your amen. That way I know you made it all the way through the lesson, and I know you were here with me. So I always encourage people to do that at the end of my lesson. If you'll just leave an amen, that way I know you made it to the end. But for those of you, everybody who's here, if somebody has any question concerning the message today, concerning this idea of how God's working and what he's trying to do, I would really appreciate that. I know it takes a little bit of time to type, so I am trying to buy you some time. All right, it's starting to look like nobody's got any questions. I tried to close off fast. I probably could have made some more points, especially if I wasn't coughing, but I probably could have made some more points. I was trying to close fast to give a chance. Also, understand there's a time delay. So by the time you realize I'm asking for questions, I'm already asking the second or third time for questions. I don't want to hold people. Again, if you have some kind of question concerning this idea of how God works and allowing stuff like this to come, allowing kingdoms to rise and empires and so forth, then I still encourage you to leave me a question. I'm giving a few more minutes before I shut everything down together. Let me go ahead and talk a little bit about our plan. That what we will do uh, is I took off some of this week because of the fact that I was again very very sick. I really want to say I appreciate everybody's prayers for me. I know I'm at the end of the message, so a lot of people will never see this. They won't make it that far, but there's a few of you I see right now who are listening. And so let me say that I very much appreciate everybody's prayers. I had the worst fever I've ever had on Sunday. And so tonsillitis is a virus. It was a viral infection, and I felt it throughout my whole body. Uh, and so even up to yesterday, I was still quite sick. Today, I'm mostly better, but you can see I have some problems with my throat. Uh, the what I will do tomorrow night is I've actually asked a friend of mine, Brother Branch, the one who preached for me on Sunday morning. He's also taught one of our student Bible studies. That there in South Africa, the restrictions are a lot tighter. And so I appreciate him helping me, and I wanted to extend that a little bit further by giving him an opportunity to preach in an open platform where he could just preach whatever he wanted to. So I gave him my Bible study tomorrow night, where I would normally teach a Bible doctrine. I let him to have that tonight. I'm glad I made that decision because it gives my voice one more night to rest before I get into bigger stuff over the weekend. But I really encourage you to come tomorrow evening, as I know Brother Branch is going to bring a great message. Brother Branch is always a tremendous preacher. He's a great missionary, one of the best missionaries I know. And so I really encourage you to be here tomorrow evening to hear him as he's going to be speaking. It'll be through my channel on YouTube. I think on Facebook, he's going to do it through his page and then tag me, and I'll maybe have to host a watch party. We're going to try whatever we have to make it work. So I encourage you to be there for that. I'm going to try my intentions. I'll also be doing the Bible study for my people in Philemon that we do with Zoom at the normal time for that tomorrow. I'm going to try to do a question and answer service. It's a lot of talking for a long time, so we'll have to see how that goes. And then, of course, Sunday, whatever it takes, we'll get back to our schedule on Sunday. I do see that somebody says, are all bad and good things from God? I think that's a technicality of how you ask or how you understand the question, uh, being this, that God is absolutely in control. Nothing happens that he doesn't either cause it or allow it. So to say God causes bad things to happen to you is not necessarily true. It depends on what you mean. Yeah, like for example, the Babylonian captivity, we would say that's bad. We would identify that if I was a Jewish person and all of a sudden my nation goes into captivity and I'm a slave and I'm really suffering, I would think that's bad. But in God's definition, that's good because it's the same principle as this. When you are a child and your parent decides to spank you, you don't say, "Yes, I'm so thankful. I love that. That spanking is so good." You don't want it. You cry. You're against it. It's bad to you, but it's actually for your good. And so sometimes things that hurt us and we think they're not truly bad. They are for our good. And in this particular case, that's very much what's going on with the Babylonian captivity is that we would identify it as bad. It's absolutely terrible. It's a really sad situation, but God is using this to spank them. This is a chastisement. He's very clear about that. He says it here in this chapter. He says it's not for your destruction. It's not going to kill you, but it is going to be a spanking. It's going to hurt. And so sometimes stuff we call bad is not really bad. Uh, that's part of the answer. And then the other part of the answer is to understand everything that happens in your life, God either calls us or allows it. Now, there is a dramatic difference between those two things. So, what I would say, for example, is that I, I'm having a hard time with necessarily an example from my side, but my sister-in-law, I don't think will mind me using her as an example. And if not, she didn't say amen, so I'm assuming she quit listening before she made it to the end. So that's what she gets. But we were discussing that she had a car accident where she was riding her bicycle. She was hit by a car, and she had the misunderstanding that she felt like God caused her to get hit by the car. And there's a tremendous difference between God causing you to get hit by a car, meaning He has ordained that this car is going to hit you at this exact time, and He's the instrumental force behind that, and God allowing this to happen because okay, it's early in the morning, somebody was rushing, somebody did something they weren't supposed to, and this happened. And her idea was that God caused her to get hit and hurt really bad. I mean, concussions, bruised up, still months later, not really recovered, and looking at not being recovered for several more months. Uh, and after all of this, she had the idea at one point when we were discussing it that God caused it so that the man who hit her could get the gospel. And I don't believe that at all. And I explained to her that it's not that God caused you to get hit. God allowed this to happen. He could have just as easily put his hand there protected and stopped it. And the truth is, he probably did put his hand there to a degree to protect her because she should have probably got. When you get hit and come off your bicycle, land on a car, and then crash down onto the road at the busiest intersection in the entire city at the busiest hour, and you don't get run over by another car, you don't get killed, you actually can get up and walk. You God did some protecting. So God certainly did some protecting on her part, but God did allow her to get hit and go through some things, and I believe for a very simple thing. That God did, yes, allow this man to get the gospel. God did do some stuff through this. God has used her in some different ways. He's opened her eyes up to some things. He grew her. There's stuff maybe even going on fruit that we're not even aware of yet. So when I say that, God did not cause the bad thing to happen. God allowed it to happen so that something else more important could work through this. And that's what we have to understand is yes, good or bad doesn't matter. God either causes it or allows it. I wouldn't even necessarily say that I know what every good and perfect gift coming from above. I get that, but I wouldn't necessarily say that every good thing in our life is caused by God so much as He allows it because He has a greater purpose. That okay, if I let this happen, something better or more important will come to pass. And that's why sometimes not everything that's good that okay, I want to do this is always from God. That's a whole nother discussion. I don't want to get too far off track by talking about that, but it is important to realize that not everything we see as good is what God sees as good. Is because of the fact that God realizes it will take you in the wrong direction. I mean, Lot is the example of that. That what Lot saw as the best land and the good choice, and was willing to go that way and separate from Abraham to get there, wind up being the destruction of his whole family. And so God didn't want it. In fact, God wasn't in the decision for him to go there. He chose that. He didn't consult with God about that at all. All right. So I think that's enough for questions. We only really had one, anyways. I appreciate everyone who stuck around throughout the entirety of the message. I appreciate the question for, I'm going to try to pronounce your name. I apologize that it's just not going to work, but for Nabil, I appreciate his question. It was a good question. It's very relevant to the particular question topic that we talked about tonight, and it gave me a chance to answer that. And so I appreciate you sticking around. Again, please make sure you come out and support Brother Branch's message tomorrow. And then I'm going to try to do the question and answer service on Saturday. Maybe we'll do a shortened one instead of trying to answer like 5 or 6 questions and then taking questions during the service. Maybe I'll shorten it and do a little bit less. Maybe that's the way to preserve my voice some for Sunday and still get this done. All right. So again, I thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and start closing out the live streams, but of course, all of this is still available later. So if you want to post a question for me to answer on Saturday, please go ahead and do so. So I'll have it. Before I close, though, I see Susan just joined. I'm not sure if she's watching live at the beginning, but let me say my greetings to Susan. And Thomas actually come in, so I'll give my greetings to Thomas as well. But all of you are catching me as I'm closing, so you have to go back and watch from the beginning if you want to get it. All right.